The spreadsheet blurred before my eyes as I blinked hard, willing away the fatigue that had become my constant companion. 23 months, 14 days. That's how long I'd been Raven Cavalcante's executive assistant, tracking his meetings, managing his calendar, and pretending not to notice the way every other person in this building walked on eggshells around him. I didn't have that luxury. Someone had to tell him when his 3 p.m. conflicted with his 3 p.m., and apparently, I was the only one willing to risk the Arctic silence that followed. My fingers flew across the keyboard, reconciling tomorrow's schedule. The annual Cavalcante Holdings charity gala loomed like an elegant guillotine. 300 of the city's most powerful people gathering in the Grand Meridian Ballroom to write checks and pretend they weren't terrified of the man hosting it. I'd already confirmed the caterer twice, vetted the guest list 3 times, and personally inspected every security protocol because Raven accepted nothing less than absolute precision. The intercom on my desk crackled to life. "Miss Ashford." His voice carried that particular edge that meant he'd found an error somewhere in the universe and expected me to fix it. "Yes, Mr. Cavalcante?" I kept my tone professionally neutral, the same voice I'd used to confirm a dentist appointment. "The Meridian contract. Clause 7. Why does it specify Belgian chocolate when I explicitly requested Swiss?" I pulled up the relevant document, scanning quickly. "Because the Belgian suppliers you prefer are exclusive to the Meridian's preferred vendor list. Swiss would require importing through a third party, which violates the venue's insurance policy. I attached a memo explaining this 3 weeks ago. Tab 2, highlighted in yellow. Silence. The kind that made junior executives sweat. I'd learned to find it almost meditative. Fine. The single word carried grudging approval. The quarterly reports are ready for review? On your desk since 7 a.m., color-coded by division, with my analysis of the discrepancies in the shipping subsidiary. Another pause. You noticed the discrepancies. I notice everything, Mr. Cavalcante. That's what you pay me for. I allowed myself the smallest smile he couldn't see. Shall I schedule a meeting with shipping to address it? Already done. They're here in 20 minutes. A beat. How did you... I anticipated your request when I spotted the issue yesterday evening. I glanced at the clock. 2:47 p.m. They should be arriving in the lobby right about now. The intercom went silent, but I caught the faintest sound that might have been a chuckle, or indigestion. With Raven, it was impossible to tell. My desk phone rang, outside line. I answered with practiced efficiency. Raven Cavalcante's office? Serafina Ashford speaking. Sarah? Thank God. Cillian's voice tumbled through the line, warm and slightly panicked. I know this is absolutely bonkers, but I'm desperate. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, recognizing the tone. Cillian owned the antique shop 2 blocks from my apartment. We'd become friends over my habit of browsing his collection of vintage first editions every Saturday morning. What did you do? Nothing. Well, something. My family's coming to town for grandmother's 85th birthday, and they've spent the last 6 months hounding me about settling down. He exhaled dramatically. They think I'm lonely because I'm not married at 32. I need a girlfriend. That's what dating apps are for, Cillian. No, I need a fake girlfriend. Just for the weekend. Someone who can smile through awkward dinners and deflect invasive questions about grandchildren. Someone brilliant and sarcastic enough to shut down my aunt's interrogations. His voice turned wheedling. Please tell me you're free this Saturday. I should have said no. My Saturday was sacred. Farmer's market in the morning, bookshop browsing in the afternoon, meal prep for the week in the evening. Routine kept me sane in a job that demanded constant flexibility. But Cillian had saved me from a nightmare tenant situation last year, lending me his guest room for 3 weeks when my previous landlord tried to illegally evict me. And he'd never once mentioned the rent I couldn't pay back, just quietly donated the equivalent to the literacy charity I volunteered with. What time? I heard myself ask. Really? Sarah, You're a saint. The gala thing is Saturday evening. Some fancy charity benefit my grandmother bought tickets 2 months ago. She's expecting me to bring someone. My stomach dropped. What gala? The Cavalcante Holdings thing at the Grand Meridian. I know, ridiculous, right? But grandmother insists it's the social event of the season. Of course it was. Of course Cillian's grandmother would have tickets to my boss's annual fundraiser. The universe had a sick sense of humor. I'll be there anyway, I said slowly. I'm coordinating the event. Even better, you already know the layout. So that's a yes? I thought of Raven's expression when he'd fired the last assistant who'd brought a date to a company function without clearing it first. But technically, I wasn't bringing a date. I was attending as a guest with someone else entirely. 2 separate capacities. Perfectly defensible. Fine, but you owe me an entire shelf from your rare fiction collection. Done. You're the best, Sarah. I'll pick you up at 7. After we hung up, I stared at the spreadsheet on my screen without seeing it. This was fine. Raven barely noticed me beyond my function as his organizational system. I'd stand next to Cillian, smile appropriately at his grandmother, and monitor the gala logistics simultaneously, multitasking at its finest. The intercom crackled again. Miss Ashford, the shipping executives are here early. I'll send them in. I pressed the button to unlock the conference room doors, then rose to greet the nervous-looking trio of men hovering near my desk. They flinched when I approached, as if proximity to Raven's assistant might somehow infect them with his displeasure. I offered them my warmest smile, the one that had diffused more executive meltdowns than I could count. Gentlemen, Mr. Cavalcante is ready for you. Please, follow me. As I led them through the double doors into Raven's office, I caught a glimpse of him behind his massive desk. 34 years old, dressed in a charcoal suit, tailored so precisely it might have been painted on, dark hair styled with military precision. His eyes, gray like winter storm clouds, flicked up to assess the newcomers with the kind of attention most people reserved for bomb disposal. Mr. Cavalcante, the shipping executives from the Quarterly Review. I gestured the men toward the chairs across from his desk. May I bring anything? Coffee? Water? Close the door on your way out, Miss Ashford. His voice carried that particular flatness that meant someone was about to have a very bad afternoon. I obeyed, returning to my desk and the 17 tasks that had accumulated in the last 30 minutes. Through the thick walls, I couldn't hear the specifics of the conversation, but the gradually increasing volume suggested things were going exactly as Raven had anticipated. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate. Wine tonight? You look like you need wine. I did. But first, I needed to survive the next 4 hours, finalize tomorrow's gala logistics, and figure out what the hell I was going to wear to play fake girlfriend at my boss's charity event. The conference room door opened. The 3 executives filed out, faces drained of color. The middle one looked like he might throw up. I gave them a sympathetic nod as they fled toward the elevators. Raven appeared in the doorway, straightening his already perfect tie. His gaze found me immediately. The Martinez contract. I need it reviewed by end of day. Already in progress. I'll have preliminary notes by 5 and the full analysis by tomorrow morning. Something shifted in his expression. So subtle I might have imagined it. You anticipated this too. The Martinez account has been unstable for 6 months. If the shipping subsidiary's finances are compromised, you'd naturally want to review all major contracts for exposure. I met his eyes steadily. I notice patterns, Mr. Cavalcante. For 3 full seconds, he simply looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. Like I'd suddenly become visible in a way I hadn't been before. The weight of that attention made my pulse jump unexpectedly. That's why you're still here, he said finally, then returned to his office and closed the door. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. 23 months, 14 days. In all that time, Raven had never looked at me like anything other than a particularly efficient piece of office equipment. The fact that he'd acknowledged my existence at all felt oddly unsettling. Shaking off the strange moment, I dove back into the Martinez contract. By 4:47 p.m., I'd identified 3 potential liability issues and drafted solutions for each. By 5:15 p.m., I'd compiled the preliminary report and sent it to Raven's secure email. My desk phone rang immediately. The third solution: explain your reasoning. I pulled up the relevant section. Martinez's majority stakeholder is heavily invested in overseas shipping lanes that overlap with our compromised subsidiary. If we restructure the payment schedule to quarterly installments instead of annual, we limit exposure while maintaining the relationship. They get better cash flow. We get less risk. And if they default, then we have a built-in exit clause after 4 quarters instead of being locked in for 3 years. Plus, the quarterly review process means we catch problems faster. Silence. Then, implement it. Draft the amendment and schedule a call with Martinez for next week. Already on your calendar for Tuesday, 10 a.m. This time, I definitely heard the chuckle. Good night, Miss Ashford. Good night, Mr. Cavalcante. I packed up my workstation, logged out of all secure systems, and grabbed my coat. The elevator ride down from the 43rd floor felt longer than usual, my mind already running through tomorrow's gala checklist. Venue confirmation, check. Catering timeline, check. Security protocols, check. Fake boyfriend who didn't know my boss would probably murder him with his eyes, pending. Outside, the October air bit through my jacket as I walked toward the subway. My phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. Miss Ashford, this is Vittoria Cavalcante. I stopped walking. Raven's mother, who he hadn't spoken to in 20 years, according to the whispered office gossip, who'd left her family when he was 14 and never looked back. Yes, Mrs. Cavalcante. I need to speak with my son, tomorrow at the gala. I know he won't take my calls, but he can't refuse me in public. My free hand clenched into a fist. I'm not asking your permission, dear. I'm informing you as a courtesy. My name should be on the guest list. Vittoria Moretti, my maiden name. Table 17. Do make sure the seating is comfortable. The call ended before I could respond. I stood on the sidewalk, phone still pressed to my ear, as pedestrians flowed around me like water around stone. Tomorrow was about to become infinitely more complicated. Saturday evening arrived wrapped in the kind of autumn chill that made the Grand Meridian's heated interior feel like a sanctuary. I'd spent the entire afternoon on site, watching the venue transform into elegant perfection. White roses and gold candlelight, live orchestra tuning in the corner, champagne fountains that cost more than my monthly salary. Now I stood in the lobby in a deep burgundy dress I'd found at a consignment shop, fitted enough to look elegant but modest enough to maintain professional credibility. My hair was swept into a low twist, simple gold studs in my ears. Understated, invisible, exactly how I preferred to operate. Sarah! Cillian materialized through the crowd, looking genuinely handsome in his navy suit. You look stunning. My grandmother is going to be thrilled. She has low standards for stunning, then. But I smiled, accepting his offered arm. Remember the rules. You can touch my hand, my arm, nothing else. We've been dating 2 months. We met when you sold me a first edition Austin. Keep the story simple. Got it. He squeezed my hand nervously. Thank you again for doing this. I know it's... Cillian! An elegant woman in her 80s swept toward us, followed by what appeared to be an entire family battalion. Finally, we've been waiting. Grandmother, this is Serafina Ashford. Sarah, my grandmother, Elena Moretti, and... The names blurred as I was introduced to what felt like 40 relatives at once. I smiled, shook hands, fielded questions about my work with diplomatic precision, Yes, I enjoyed antiques. Yes, Cillian was very thoughtful. No, we weren't discussing marriage yet. Thank you for asking. Through it all, I kept one eye on the ballroom logistics. The catering team was 3 minutes behind schedule. The orchestra was slightly off-tempo. The lighting tech had forgotten to dim the east chandeliers to match my specifications. Excuse me for just one moment, I murmured to Cillian, already moving toward the event coordinator. 5 minutes later, I'd corrected 3 small disasters and returned to find Cillian deep in conversation with an aunt about classical music. His hand found mine again as I rejoined the group, and I let him take it, playing the part. The ballroom doors opened. Guests began flowing toward their assigned tables. I guided Cillian's family toward 17, still scanning for problems, and that's when I saw her. Vittoria Moretti sat at table 17 in a silver dress that probably cost more than my car, if I'd owned a car. Her dark hair was styled in elegant waves, diamonds at her throat, expression serene as she surveyed the crowd like a queen reviewing her subjects. My stomach knotted. I'd spent the last 18 hours trying to figure out how to warn Raven about his mother's presence without overstepping boundaries. I'd rehearsed 3 different approaches. I'd drafted and deleted 4 emails. But I'd never found the right moment, the right words. And now it was too late. Grandmother. Cillian's whole face lit up. You didn't tell me you knew Vittoria. Elena Moretti and Vittoria embraced like old friends, which they apparently were. Of course, because the universe was determined to make this evening as complicated as possible. Elena, darling. Vittoria's voice was warm honey. And this must be Cillian's young lady. How lovely. She extended her hand to me. I shook it, feeling like I'd just touched something venomous. Serafina Ashford, I said carefully. Pleasure to meet you. The pleasure is mine. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes were calculating. Ashford, that name sounds familiar. I work in the financial district. Ah. Understanding flickered across her face. How interesting. The orchestra struck up the opening melody. Guests settled into their seats. I remained standing, scanning the room for Raven's inevitable entrance. He always arrived exactly 12 minutes after the doors opened, late enough to avoid small talk, early enough to avoid causing offense. I'd timed it over 3 years of company events. 11 minutes, 43 seconds. Cillian tugged my hand gently. Sarah, you okay? Fine. I sank into the chair beside him, hyper-aware of Vittoria watching me from across the table. Just monitoring the schedule. You really can't turn it off, can you? His smile was affectionate. The event coordinator thing. Someone has to make sure the champagne fountains don't run dry. Is that what you do? Event coordination? Vittoria leaned forward, all polite interest. Executive assistance, actually. I met her gaze steadily. I work for Cavalcante Holdings. Something sharp flashed in her eyes. How fascinating. You must know my son, then. The orchestra swelled. The ballroom doors opened one final time. Raven Cavalcante entered like winter itself had taken human form. He wore a black tuxedo tailored with the precision of surgical instruments, his dark hair immaculate, his expression carved from granite. Behind him came Marcus, his head of security, a mountain of a man who'd once been special forces, and now ensured that Raven's world remained exactly as ordered as he demanded. Every conversation in the ballroom dimmed slightly as Raven moved through the crowd. Not because people were staring. No one dared stare at Raven Cavalcante directly. But because his presence altered the atmospheric pressure of any room he occupied. I watched him navigate toward the host table at the front, shaking hands with major donors, his movements economical and deliberate. He'd speak to exactly the right people for exactly the right amount of time. Then he'd deliver his brief welcome speech. And then... His gaze swept the room in what appeared to be casual assessment, and stopped. On me, on my hand, still resting in Cillian's on the table. For 3 full seconds, Raven Cavalcante, the man whose emotional range typically varied from coldly professional to Arctic fury, simply stared. His expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift, but something in the air itself seemed to crystallize. Then he moved. Not toward the host table. Not toward the major donors who'd already begun gravitating in his direction, hoping to monopolize his attention. Toward us. 5 long strides across the ballroom floor, each one measured and precise. The conversations at nearby tables trailed off as people registered his trajectory. Even the orchestra seemed to falter slightly, violins going momentarily off-key. He stopped at our table. His gray eyes, which I'd always considered cold, were now absolutely glacial as they fixed on me with an intensity that made my ribs feel tight. Miss Ashford. His voice carried that particular dangerous quietness that made executives confess to embezzlement. A word. It wasn't a request. Cillian's hand tightened on mine, protective. Is everything? It's fine. I extracted my hand from his, stood on unsteady legs. Mr. Cavalcante, is there a problem with the event coordination? Now. He turned and walked toward the exit that led to the private balcony. I followed, feeling Vittoria's calculating stare burning into my back. Behind me, I could hear Cillian's grandmother whispering to Elena in rapid Italian. The balcony was mercifully empty, overlooking the city skyline. The October wind cut through my dress immediately, raising goosebumps along my arms. Raven stood at the railing, his back to me, hands braced against the stone like he was physically restraining himself from something. Mr. Cavalcante, if this is about the chocolate, since when do you date? Each word was precisely enunciated, as if he was testing them for hidden meanings. I blinked. I'm sorry? He turned to face me, and the expression on his face was nothing I'd ever seen before. Not anger, exactly. Something rawer, more dangerous. You heard me. Since when do you date? Of all the possible conversations we could be having right now, about his mother's presence, about the seating arrangements, about the dozens of logistics I'd managed for this event, he wanted to discuss my personal life? Since men started asking me out, Mr. Cavalcante. I crossed my arms against the cold, allowing my most devastating sarcasm to surface. It happens to people with social skills. You should research the concept. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Who is he? That's not really your concern, is it? I kept my voice leveled despite the surreal nature of this entire conversation. Unless my dating life somehow affects my performance at work, which it doesn't. You brought him to a company event. I brought a guest to a public charity gala that I happened to be attending in my personal capacity. I raised an eyebrow. There's no policy against that. I checked. Of course you did. Something that might have been dark amusement flickered across his face. You check everything. It's my job to check everything. The cold was starting to make my teeth want to chatter, but I refused to show weakness. Was there something specific you needed, or can I return to my date? The word date seemed to hit him physically. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, then deliberately relaxed. How long? He asked, his voice dropping even lower. How long what? How long have you been seeing him? This was absurd. We were standing on a freezing balcony, the charity gala I'd spent 6 weeks organizing happening without my supervision inside, because my boss was interrogating me about my relationship status with an intensity usually reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. 2 months, I heard myself say. The lie felt strange on my tongue, but I couldn't exactly explain the fake dating arrangement to the man who currently looked like he might buy Cillian's entire antique shop just to shut it down. Not that it's 2 months. He repeated it like he was committing it to memory. And you didn't think to mention it. Why would I mention it? Genuine confusion was starting to overtake my irritation. Do you tell me about your dating life? His laugh was sharp and humorless. I don't have a dating life. Right. You have women who sit at table 17 with your mother. The words escaped before I could stop them. Finally, his expression cracked. What? Oh no. Table 17, I said carefully. Your mother is here. She called me yesterday, used her maiden name to get on the guest list. She's sitting with Cillian's grandmother. They're apparently old friends. Raven went absolutely still. Not tense, not angry. Still, like a predator deciding whether to strike or retreat. You knew, he said softly. You knew, and you didn't tell me. I tried to find the right moment. My voice came out smaller than intended. I didn't know how to, there wasn't a good way to. Get back inside, Miss Ashford. His voice had gone flat and cold. Make sure the event proceeds smoothly, and keep your date away from table 17. He brushed past me, returning to the ballroom. I stood alone on the balcony for a long moment, trying to understand what had just happened. My boss, my famously controlled, emotionally distant boss, had just interrogated me about my dating life with an intensity that suggested. What? Jealousy? No. Impossible. Raven Cavalcante didn't do jealousy. He barely did emotions. But as I returned to the ballroom and found Cillian waiting anxiously by our table, I couldn't shake the memory of Raven's face when he'd seen us holding hands, the way his expression had shattered for just a moment, revealing something raw and furious beneath. Is everything okay? Cillian whispered as I rejoined him. Your boss looked... It's fine. I managed a smile, sliding back into my chair. Across the table, Vittoria was watching me with predatory interest. Everything's under control. The lie tasted bitter, because nothing was under control anymore, and I had no idea how to fix it. Over the following weeks, my carefully ordered world began fracturing in ways I couldn't explain and didn't know how to stop. It started small. Monday morning after the gala, I arrived at 6:45 a.m. to find Raven already at his desk. Unusual for a man whose schedule I knew down to the minute. He barely acknowledged me beyond a curt nod, but his gaze tracked me as I moved through my morning routine, cataloging his day, sorting priority communications, preparing his first meeting brief. By Tuesday, he'd somehow discovered that Cillian and I had dinner planned at Marcello's, the Italian restaurant 3 blocks from my apartment. I only knew because when I arrived with Cillian at 7, Raven was there, in a back corner booth, alone with an untouched plate of pasta and a financial report spread across his table. Isn't that your boss? Cillian whispered, following my stunned gaze. Yes, I managed. What a coincidence. But it wasn't a coincidence. Marcello's wasn't in Raven's neighborhood. It wasn't near his office or his penthouse or any of his business holdings. The only logical reason for him to be there was me. He didn't approach our table, didn't acknowledge my presence beyond a single searing glance when we first walked in. But I felt his attention on me throughout the entire meal like a physical weight, making every laugh with Cillian feel performative, every touch of hands across the table seem magnified. Wednesday brought an urgent email at 8 p.m. Need Martinez analysis reviewed. In office now. Require your immediate presence. I'd been at home in comfortable clothes, halfway through meal prep for the week. I changed back into work attire, took the subway to the office, and arrived at 9:17 p.m. to find Raven behind his desk, the Martinez file open before him. The third quarter projections, he said without preamble. Walk me through your reasoning on the Asia-Pacific expansion. I did. For 2 hours. Standing beside his desk while he questioned every assumption, challenged every projection, pushed me to defend conclusions I'd spent weeks developing. By 11:30 p.m., my feet ached in their heels, and I'd started wondering if this was punishment for something I didn't understand. That's all, he said finally, closing the file. Good work, Miss Ashford. It's 11:30 at night, Mr. Cavalcante. I kept my voice carefully neutral. Was this analysis urgent enough that it couldn't wait until morning? His gray eyes met mine, unreadable. I needed to be certain. Of the projections? Of your reasoning? He leaned back in his chair. You're the only person in this company whose analysis I trust without verification. I needed to understand why. The admission hung between us, strange and weighted. I'd worked for this man for nearly 2 years, had proven myself reliable 1,000 times over, and suddenly he needed to understand why he trusted me. Good night, Mr. Cavalcante. I turned to leave before I said something I'd regret. How was your dinner? His voice stopped me at the door. I looked back. He was staring at the closed file, not at me. At Marcello's. How was your dinner? My pulse jumped. You were there for over an hour. I'm sure you noticed it was fine. I noticed you laughed. His fingers tapped once on the desk, the only sign of agitation. 16 times. You don't laugh at work. Because spreadsheets aren't funny, Mr. Cavalcante. I tried to keep the edge from my voice. Is there a problem with me being happy in my personal life? No. But the word came out too sharp to be honest. No problem. I left before the conversation could spiral into stranger territory. But as the elevator descended, I couldn't shake the image of him sitting alone in that back booth at Marcello's, watching me with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. Thursday, he appeared at the coffee shop where I grabbed my morning latte. Friday, he somehow scheduled a client meeting at the restaurant where Cillian had made reservations for our 3-month anniversary dinner, a detail I hadn't shared with anyone at work. By Saturday, when I opened my email to find a non-urgent contract requiring my immediate review and in-office presence, on a weekend, for the first time in 23 months, I'd had enough. I stormed into his office at 2 p.m., the contract clutched in my hand, my professional composure cracking at the edges. Mr. Cavalcante, with respect, what the hell is happening? He looked up from his desk, expression carefully blank. The Peterson contract is not time-sensitive. I marked it for Monday review. I crossed my arms. You've been at every restaurant where I've had plans for the last 2 weeks. You've sent urgent work requests at increasingly absurd hours. You've somehow known my schedule despite me not telling you. I own this building. His voice was dangerously soft. I know everything that happens in it. I don't live in this building, Mr. Cavalcante. I live in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens with a roommate and questionable heating. So unless you've been tracking my phone... The way his jaw tightened told me everything. Oh my God. I stared at him. You have been tracking my phone. The company phone you issued has tracking software. For security purposes. But he didn't deny it. Your role requires access to sensitive information. It's standard protocol. Standard protocol is informing employees about surveillance. My hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with fury. You've been following me, watching me, showing up everywhere I go with Cillian. Don't. The single word cracked like a whip. Don't say his name. The raw emotion in his voice stopped my tirade dead. Raven Cavalcante didn't do raw emotion. He did cold calculation and controlled fury and occasionally, very occasionally, dry amusement. But never this. This barely leashed something that made the air between us feel electrified. Why? I asked, my voice dropping to match his. Why does it matter where I go or who I'm with? I do my job. I do it well. My personal life. Your personal life appeared out of nowhere. He stood, rounding the desk with that predatory grace that always reminded people he hadn't earned his power through kindness. 2 years, Miss Ashford. 2 years where you came in early, stayed late, never mentioned boyfriends or dates or any life beyond this office. And suddenly, there's someone. Someone who makes you laugh 16 times over pasta. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that I could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. "So forgive me for being curious about the man who managed to interest you when I—" He cut himself off sharply. When he what? The question hung between us, unspoken. His eyes searched my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. For the first time since I'd started working for him, I registered details beyond the professional. The exact gray of his eyes, like storm clouds breaking. The sharp line of his jaw. The way his perfectly styled hair had one rebellious strand falling slightly forward, probably from running his hands through it. A stress tell I'd never noticed before because I'd never been looking. When had I started looking? "Mr. Cavalcante." I forced steel into my voice. "Whatever this is, it needs to stop. I have a boyfriend. You have—" I gestured vaguely. "Whatever it is you have, this is inappropriate." Inappropriate. He repeated the word like it was foreign. "You think I don't know that? Then stop. I've tried." The admission seemed to cost him. "For 2 weeks I've tried. But every time I see you with him, every time you smile at him the way you never smile at me, I work for you." The reminder felt necessary, like throwing cold water on something that had started to burn too hot. "You're my boss. That's all we are, all we've ever been." Something in his expression shuddered. The raw emotion vanished, replaced by the familiar ice. "You're right, of course." His voice went flat. "This conversation was unprofessional. It won't happen again." He returned to his desk, dismissing me as effectively as if he'd spoken the words aloud. I stood there for 5 more seconds, my heart hammering against my ribs for reasons I refused to examine. Then I left, returning to my studio apartment, where my roommate took one look at my face and immediately poured wine. "What happened?" "I think my boss is jealous," I heard myself say. "Of my fake boyfriend." My roommate's eyes widened. "The one who—" "Yes, that one." I downed half the glass in one go. "Except it's not real, and Raven doesn't know that, and now he's tracking my phone and showing up everywhere and I don't know what to do." Maybe tell him the truth? I thought about Raven's face when he'd said Cillian's name, the way he'd looked at me like I'd betrayed something fundamental, even though we'd never had an understanding beyond professional efficiency. I can't. The truth settled like lead in my stomach. Because if I tell him it's fake, then I have to explain why I've been lying. And I don't even know anymore. Over the next 3 weeks, the situation evolved into something stranger and more complex. Raven stopped tracking my phone, or at least stopped making it obvious. But he found other ways to demonstrate his presence. The building that housed Cillian's antique shop suddenly had a new owner. The notice came with 30 days to vacate or negotiate a new lease at triple the current rate. When I asked Cillian who'd bought the property, he showed me the paperwork, a subsidiary of Cavalcante Holdings that I'd never heard of before. I confronted Raven the next morning. "The Westbrook property acquisition, that was you." He didn't look up from his computer. "Cavalcante Holdings acquires property frequently. That's what we do." "That specific building houses Cillian's business." "I'm aware." Still not looking at me. "He should negotiate. The new terms are more than fair given the neighborhood's appreciation. He can't afford triple the lease." Finally, Raven's gaze met mine. "Then perhaps he should have considered that before—" He stopped himself. "The decision is made, Miss Ashford. If you'd like to discuss business acquisitions, I'm happy to review the rationale. Otherwise, we have actual work to address." I wanted to scream, wanted to shake him, wanted to demand he explain what the hell he thought he was doing, weaponizing his empire against a small business owner whose only crime was agreeing to be my fake date. Instead, I turned on my heel and spent the next 2 days quietly helping Cillian find a new location, with a lease he could actually afford. Raven said nothing, but I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. The following week brought a new complication. Vittoria. She appeared at the office unannounced, gliding past security like she owned the place. I looked up from my desk to find her standing before me in a cream Chanel suit, diamonds at her throat, smile sharp as broken glass. "Miss Ashford, how lovely to see you again." "Mrs. Moretti." I kept my voice professionally neutral. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Cavalcante?" "I'm his mother, dear. I don't need an appointment." The intercom crackled. "Miss Ashford, hold all my calls for—" Raven's voice stopped as he opened his office door and saw her. "What are you doing here?" "Raven, darling." Vittoria's smile didn't waver. "Is that any way to greet your mother? You're not my mother." Each word was precise and deadly. "You're a woman who shares my DNA and abandoned her children 20 years ago. That's all." "I made a mistake." She moved toward him, heels clicking on the marble floor. "I want to make amends." "After 20 years. How convenient." Raven's expression could have frozen the sun. "What do you really want?" "To reconnect with my son, to be part of your life again." Her gaze slid to me. "Miss Ashford seems like a lovely girl. Is she your assistant, or something more?" "That's none of your concern." "Everything about you is my concern, darling. I gave birth to you. That creates certain rights." I watched Raven's hands clench into fists, the first break in his control I'd seen since Vittoria arrived. Something in my chest tightened at the vulnerability I glimpsed beneath his rage. "You have no rights here." His voice dropped to that dangerous softness. "Leave, now, or I'll have security remove you." "Raven, now." Vittoria's smile finally cracked. She glanced at me one last time, something calculating in her expression, then swept toward the elevator. After she left, Raven remained standing in his doorway, staring at nothing. His shoulders were rigid, his breathing carefully controlled. "Mr. Cavalcante." I kept my voice gentle. "Are you—" "Cancel my afternoon appointments." He turned back into his office. "I'll be working from home for the rest of the day." The door closed. I sat at my desk, staring at my carefully organized calendar, and realized something fundamental had shifted. I'd spent 23 months seeing Raven Cavalcante as my boss. Difficult, demanding, occasionally impossible, but ultimately just a job, a paycheck, a professional relationship with clear boundaries. But the man who'd just faced down his estranged mother with barely contained fury wasn't just my boss anymore. He was human in ways I'd never allowed myself to acknowledge. Vulnerable in ways that made my protective instincts surge. And somewhere along the way, without noticing exactly when, I'd started caring about him in ways that had nothing to do with professional competence and everything to do with the raw pain I'd glimpsed behind his perfect control. My phone buzzed. Cillian. "Sarah, we need to talk. I met someone." The words should have brought relief. Instead, they brought a strange sense of foreboding, like the universe had just moved pieces on a board I didn't know I was playing on. "Tell me everything," I said, even as my gaze remained fixed on Raven's closed door. Cillian met me at our usual coffee shop that evening, his expression apologetic but hopeful in a way I'd never seen before. Her name is Margot. She came into the shop last week looking for a Victorian writing desk. He couldn't stop smiling. We talked for 3 hours. She's an historian, specializes in 19th century literature. She's brilliant and funny. And, "Sarah, I think this might be real." I set down my latte carefully. "That's wonderful, Cillian." "Which means we should probably end our arrangement." He reached across the table, taking my hand in a gesture that was pure friendship. "You've been amazing. You saved me from endless family interrogations, and I'll be forever grateful. But I can't keep pretending when there's someone I actually want to date." "Of course." Relief washed through me. "You absolutely should pursue this." "You're sure?" His eyes searched mine. I know the timing is awkward with everything happening at your work. Your boss buying my building. That's not your problem. That's between me and Raven. The name slipped out too familiarly. Cillian raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. We finished our coffee, made plans to stay friends, hugged goodbye at the subway entrance. It was clean and simple, and exactly how fake relationships should end. No drama, no hurt feelings, just two people returning to their real lives. I should have felt free. Instead, I felt strangely unbalanced, like I'd been using a prop to hold myself upright, and suddenly it was gone. The revelation hit me on the subway ride home. For 3 months, I'd been watching Raven's increasingly possessive behavior and telling myself it was unwanted, inappropriate, something to be shut down. I'd used Cillian as a shield against acknowledging the truth, that Raven's jealousy had awakened something in me I'd been determinedly ignoring for 2 years. The way my pulse jumped when he entered a room. The electricity that crackled when his hand accidentally brushed mine passing documents. The satisfaction I felt when I anticipated his needs perfectly, earning that rare flicker of approval in his storm-gray eyes. I'd filed all of it under professional pride and efficient working relationship. But sitting on that subway car, remembering the raw vulnerability on his face when his mother appeared, the way he'd looked at me when he thought I was unavailable, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Somewhere in the last 4 months, I'd developed feelings for my boss that had nothing to do with spreadsheets and everything to do with the man beneath the ice. Monday morning, I arrived at the office with a plan. I would tell Raven the truth about Cillian. Clear the air. Then we could. What? Date? That was its own minefield of complications, but at least we'd be operating with honest information. Except Raven wasn't there. Mr. Cavalcante is working from home this week. His head of security, Marcus, informed me when I inquired. He'll video conference for urgent matters only. This was unprecedented. Raven worked from the office 6 days a week, only taking calls from home when traveling. Something was wrong. I spent Monday managing his calendar remotely, fielding calls, keeping the company running as smoothly as always. But by Tuesday afternoon, when he'd missed 3 critical meetings and responded to my emails with single-word answers, my concern overwhelmed my professionalism. I took a taxi to his penthouse. The building was as intimidating as expected. All glass and steel, and a doorman who looked at me like I was attempting to break into Fort Knox. I gave my name, explained I was Raven's assistant with urgent documents, and prepared to be turned away. Instead, the doorman made a call, then waved me through to the elevator. Mr. Cavalcante is expecting you. Penthouse level. The ride up felt endless. My palms were sweating. I'd never seen Raven's home, never glimpsed his personal life beyond the carefully curated professional persona. Now I was about to invade his private space with a confession about fake dating and real feelings, and I had no idea how he'd react. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse. I stepped into a space that was somehow exactly and nothing like I expected. Modern, minimalist, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But also, books everywhere. A grand piano in the corner. Artwork that suggested actual taste rather than expensive interior decoration. Miss Ashford. Raven appeared from what I assumed was his home office, dressed in black slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the most casual I'd ever seen him, and the sight did something dangerous to my composure. Mr. Cavalcante, I was worried when you missed the Peterson meeting. Marcus is handling it. He gestured toward a leather sofa. You didn't need to come here. Actually, I did. I remained standing. Because there's something I need to tell you, and I've been a coward about it for too long. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. All right. Cillian and I aren't actually dating. We never were. The words came out in a rush. His family was pressuring him about settling down. He needed a fake girlfriend for some family events. I owed him a favor. That's all it was. A performance. Nothing real. Raven went absolutely still. You've been lying to me. Yes, I forced myself to meet his gaze. And I'm sorry, but you never actually asked if it was real. You just showed up everywhere, bought his building, made me work late. You let me think. His voice was dangerously soft. For 3 months, you let me believe you were with him. Because you were being insane. My own frustration finally broke free. You tracked my phone, stalked my dates, used your empire to harass a small business owner, all without ever once using actual words to tell me what you wanted. What I wanted? He moved toward me with that predatory grace. You want to know what I wanted, Miss Ashford? Yes, actually, I would love some clarity. Because from where I'm standing, you've spent 4 months making my life complicated without ever explaining why. He stopped close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell his cologne, cedar and something sharper, more complex. I wanted to know why he got your laughter when I've never heard it. Why you smiled at him in ways you never smiled at me. Why after 2 years of working beside me, of proving yourself indispensable, you chose someone else the moment you decided to actually live instead of just exist. The raw honesty in his voice stole my breath. I wanted to understand what he had that I apparently lacked, what made him worthy of your time when He cut himself off, jaw tightening. When I'd been too goddamn blind to see you as anything but my assistant until someone else did. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it. You never looked at me that way. Not once in 2 years. Because I'm your boss. His hand came up, hovering near my face, but not quite touching. Because crossing that line would be unforgivable. Because you deserved better than this. He gestured vaguely at himself. Than a man who owns half the city and can't manage basic emotional honesty. Raven. His name felt strange and perfect on my tongue. You're not actually as emotionally bankrupt as you think. A laugh, sharp, humorless, escaped him. No? I threatened your boyfriend's livelihood out of jealousy. I tracked your movements. I manufactured reasons to keep you late at the office just to maintain proximity. That's not healthy behavior, Sarah. The nickname, the first time he'd ever used it, made something in my chest clench. It's also not entirely unwelcome. The confession cost me. I've spent 4 months telling myself you were being inappropriate, that your jealousy was invasive and controlling, and it was. All of those things. But it was also the only reason I started noticing you as something other than my paycheck. His eyes searched mine. What does that mean? It means I spent 2 years being professionally excellent and personally invisible. I came in early, stayed late, anticipated your needs with borderline psychic accuracy. But you never saw me as anything beyond a particularly efficient assistant until someone else did. I forced myself to be as honest as he'd been. And somewhere in watching you lose your mind over a fake relationship, I realized I'd developed very real feelings for you. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. This is a terrible idea, Raven said finally, but his hand had moved to cradle my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I'm your employer. The power dynamic is something we can navigate if we both want to. I leaned into his touch, my pulse racing. Or we can go back to pretending this doesn't exist. Your choice. If I touch you now, his voice dropped lower, rough with restrained need. I won't stop at one kiss. I've wanted this for too long to be moderate about it. Then don't be moderate. The words escaped before I could consider their implications. I'm tired of moderate, Raven. I'm tired of pretending. He kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was 4 months of frustrated want, compressed into a single moment, his mouth claiming mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. His hand slid into my hair, destroying the careful twist I'd styled that morning. My back hit the wall. When had we moved? and his body pressed against mine, solid and overwhelming, and exactly what I'd been denying I wanted. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. "If we do this," he said, voice ragged, "everything changes." Everything already changed. I traced the sharp line of his jaw with shaking fingers. "We're just acknowledging it now. My mother." The non sequitur made me blink. "She'll use this. Use you. She has a talent for finding leverage and exploiting it. Let her try." I surprised myself with the fierceness in my voice. I've spent my entire life being underestimated. It's my favorite place to operate from. Something that might have been pride flickered in his eyes, then concern. "You don't know what you're signing up for, Sarah. My world, the things I've done to build this empire. I've worked for you for 2 years. I catalog your meetings, manage your schedule, review your contracts. I'm not naive about what you do or how you do it." I held his gaze steadily. "If I were, I would have run the moment you tracked my phone." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Any sane person would have." "I've never claimed sanity was my strong suit." I kissed him again, softer this time. Just organizational skills and a devastating capacity for sarcasm. His laugh, genuine, warm, was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. We spent the rest of that afternoon on his couch, learning the geography of each other beyond the professional. How his hands, so economical in the office, became reverent when they traced the curve of my spine. How my laughter, so carefully guarded at work, came easily when he recounted stories of his early days building the company. By evening, we'd established new rules. I would remain his assistant. I was too good at it to abandon the role, and he needed someone he could trust without question. But after hours, we belonged to each other in ways that had nothing to do with org charts and everything to do with the connection we'd been denying. It should have been simple. It wasn't. Because the next morning, as I sat at my desk reviewing contracts with a carefully professional expression, while my lips still tingled from Raven's goodbye kiss that morning, Vittoria appeared again. And this time, she wasn't alone. The man accompanying Vittoria was older, distinguished in a way that set off every alarm bell in my carefully honed instincts. Silver hair, expensive suit, smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Ashford." Vittoria's greeting carried false warmth. "How delightful to see you again. This is Domenico Salvatore, an old family friend." The name Salvatore made something click in my memory. I'd seen it in contracts, buried in subsidiary paperwork for Cavalcante Holdings, an investment group that kept appearing and disappearing in the corporate structure, always just distant enough to avoid scrutiny, but close enough to have influence. "A pleasure," I said neutrally, not extending my hand. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Cavalcante?" "Not exactly." Salvatore's smile widened. "But I'm sure Raven will make time for family." Family. The word was carefully chosen, deliberately weighted. I pressed the intercom. "Mr. Cavalcante, Vittoria Moretti and Domenico Salvatore are here to see you." The pause before Raven answered was infinitesimal, but I'd learned to read his silences. This one was fury barely contained. "Send them in." I opened the door to his office. Raven stood behind his desk, every line of his body radiating controlled menace. His gaze flickered to me for just a moment, checking that I was all right, before fixing on the visitors. "You have 5 minutes," he said flatly. "Use them wisely." Vittoria moved to take a seat. "Raven, darling, there's no need for hostility. Domenico is here to discuss a business opportunity." "No." The single word cut like a blade. "Whatever arrangement you're proposing, the answer is no." Salvatore chuckled, settling into the chair across from Raven's desk, uninvited. "You haven't heard the terms yet." "I don't need to. You're working with her." He gestured dismissively at Vittoria. which means you're either planning to leverage family connection for extortion, or you're trying to regain influence over Cavalcante Holdings through sentimental manipulation. Either way, I'm not interested. What if I told you, Salvatore said smoothly, that I have information about certain irregularities in your overseas operations? Nothing criminal, of course, but potentially embarrassing if made public. I felt cold fury settle in my chest. Blackmail. They were attempting to blackmail Raven using his own mother as the entry point. Get out. Raven's voice dropped to that dangerous softness I'd learned meant someone was about to face consequences. Both of you. Now. Raven, please. Vittoria's mask cracked slightly, showing desperation beneath. If you'd just listen. I gave you a chance 20 years ago to be my mother. You chose money and status over your children. Now you show up with this. He glanced at Salvatore with obvious disgust. Attempting to extort me using my own company? Get out. Salvatore rose slowly. This isn't over, Cavalcante. You'll want to reconsider. Mr. Salvatore. I stepped into the office, my voice carrying the same steel I'd heard Raven use when ending hostile negotiations. I believe Mr. Cavalcante was clear. Your 5 minutes are complete. Shall I call security, or will you leave voluntarily? His gaze turned to me, assessing and unpleasant. And who might you be? The person who manages Mr. Cavalcante's schedule, reviews all contracts and, more relevantly, knows where every single financial record for this company is stored. I smiled with no warmth, including the overseas accounts you're referencing, which, I should mention, I audited personally last quarter and found completely compliant with international law. I was bluffing partially, but I'd learned from Raven that confidence sold lies better than facts sometimes. Salvatore's smile tightened. How convenient that Mr. Cavalcante has such a thorough assistant. Isn't it? I held his gaze steadily. Now, as I mentioned, security or voluntary departure. Vittoria moved toward Raven, desperation clear now. Raven, please. I made mistakes, but I'm your mother. That has to mean something. It means nothing. Raven's voice was empty of emotion in a way that was somehow worse than anger. You chose to abandon that role. You don't get to reclaim it when it becomes financially convenient. He pressed a button on his desk. Marcus appeared in the doorway within seconds, his imposing frame filling the space. Escort Ms. Moretti and Mr. Salvatore to the elevator. Make sure they understand they're not welcome in this building again. As Marcus ushered them out, Salvatore going with dignity, Vittoria with protests that echoed down the hallway. I remained in the doorway, watching Raven's carefully controlled facade crack at the edges. The moment the office door closed, his shoulders sagged infinitesimally. Are you okay? I asked softly. I'm fine. But his hands were shaking slightly as he poured himself whiskey from the bar cart. I apologize that you had to witness that. Don't. I moved to stand beside him. And don't apologize for her. She made her choices. She's trying to use old connections from before she left. Salvatore was part of my father's original investment group, one of the people who helped build the foundation before my father cut ties. He swallowed the whiskey in one go. She's desperate enough to weaponize her past against her own son. The pain beneath his words made my chest ache. I took the empty glass from his hand and set it aside, then laced my fingers through his. She'll try again, I said. People like that always do. I know. His thumb traced circles on my palm, seeking comfort in the small touch. I should have handled her appearance at the gala differently. Should have anticipated. You can't anticipate everything, Raven. Not even you. I squeezed his hand. But you can accept help. Let me be your second set of eyes on this. He looked at me then, really looked, and something shifted in his expression. You stood up to him, to Salvatore, despite not knowing exactly what he had. I knew enough, and I knew you wouldn't be threatened by something legitimate. I allowed myself a small smile. Also, I really did audit those overseas accounts. They're clean, so his leverage was probably fabricated anyway. The ghost of his smile appeared. You're terrifying when you want to be. I learned from the best. I leaned up to kiss him softly. Now, let's actually review those accounts together and make sure there's nothing hidden that could be used against you. Over the following weeks, Vittoria made 3 more attempts to contact Raven. Through lawyers, through old family connections, through increasingly desperate messages left with my desk that I simply deleted without passing along. Each time, Raven's expression would go carefully blank, his control absolute. But I'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. Our relationship deepened in the quiet spaces between business crisis management. Late nights in his office turned into late nights at his penthouse, my toothbrush appearing in his bathroom, my coffee preference mysteriously becoming stocked in his kitchen. We kept it strictly separate from work hours. In the office, I was still Miss Ashford. He was still Mr. Cavalcante. Our professionalism unassailable. But after hours, I learned the man beneath the reputation. How he played piano when stressed, fingers moving over keys with the same precision he brought to hostile takeovers. How he'd taught himself to cook during business school because eating out meant wasting time. How his mother's abandonment had shaped every relationship he'd had since, making trust something he extended with surgical precision to almost no one. I don't know how to do this, he admitted one evening, as we lay tangled together on his couch, the city lights spreading beneath us through floor-to-ceiling windows. Relationships, vulnerability. I'm good at control, at maintaining distance. But with you, with me, you can stop controlling everything. I traced the line of his jaw, feeling the tension there. I'm not going anywhere, Raven. I've seen the worst parts of your world and I'm still here. You shouldn't be. But his arms tightened around me. You deserve someone normal. Someone who doesn't have enemies trying to blackmail him through his own mother. Normal is overrated. I prefer brilliant, possessive, and occasionally impossible. I kissed him softly. Which, in case you missed it, is exactly what you are. His laugh was quiet but genuine. Occasionally impossible? At least twice a week. Your demands for Swiss chocolate at venues that only stock Belgian, for instance. That was one time. It was 3 times, but who's counting? I settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. The point is, I know exactly who you are. All of you. And I'm choosing to stay. The words were both truth and promise. Because somewhere in the last 6 months, Raven Cavalcante had become more than my boss, more than the dangerous man who controlled half the city. He'd become the person I wanted beside me, the partner who challenged and supported me in equal measure. But the universe, as always, had complications in store. 2 months after the attempted blackmail, I arrived at work to find Raven already in his office, his expression grimmer than I'd seen since his mother's first appearance. What happened? I asked immediately. He slid a folder across his desk. Salvatore. He didn't give up. He just changed tactics. Inside were photos, grainy but clear enough, of various business meetings Raven had conducted over the years. Deals that skirted the edge of legal, but never quite crossed it. Conversations with people whose reputations were less pristine than Raven's carefully cultivated public image. None of this is illegal, Raven said. But taken out of context, presented the right way to the right authorities, it could trigger investigations that would tie up the company for years. Damage our reputation. Cost us billions. What does he want? A seat on the board, 20% equity in the overseas subsidiaries, and his jaw tightened, for me to publicly reconcile with my mother. A nice family reunion story to rehabilitate her social standing. I stared at the photos, my mind racing through options. We could call his bluff, Invite the investigation. Prove there's nothing. Sarah. Raven's voice was gentle but firm. Even a clean investigation damages trust. Investors panic. Partners get nervous. Salvatore knows exactly what he's doing. So what do we do? He was silent for a long moment. Then, I give him what he wants. No. The word escaped before I could stop it. Raven, you can't let them manipulate you like this. I can, if it protects the company. If it protects... He stopped himself, but I heard what he didn't say. If it protects you. Because at some point in our relationship, I'd become a vulnerability. Something Vittoria and Salvatore could leverage if they discovered the truth. And they would discover it eventually. Secrets never stayed secret in his world. There's another option, I said slowly, an idea forming. We let them think they're winning while we build a counterattack. I'll need access to Salvatore's background, his business dealings, his connections with Vittoria before she left your father. Raven's eyes sharpened. What are you thinking? That people who attempt blackmail usually have skeletons of their own, and I happen to be very good at finding things people want to keep hidden. I met his gaze steadily. Give me 2 weeks. If I can't find anything, you can give Salvatore his board seat, but let me try first. For a moment, I thought he'd refuse. Then he nodded slowly. 2 weeks, but Sarah, be careful. These people aren't corporate enemies playing polite games. If they realize you're investigating them, then they'll underestimate me. I smiled with more confidence than I felt. It's my favorite advantage. What followed were the most intense 2 weeks of my professional life. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously. Managing Raven's schedule and company operations during business hours, conducting my investigation after hours, and maintaining our relationship in the stolen moments between. I discovered Salvatore's financial records showed irregularities he'd carefully buried. Offshore accounts, shell companies, investments in ventures that couldn't withstand scrutiny. More importantly, I found the connection to Vittoria. She'd been feeding him information about Cavalcante Holdings operations since before she left Raven's father, positioning herself as a long-term spy for a rival faction within the original investment group. The abandonment 20 years ago hadn't been about pursuing a better life. It had been about cashing out at exactly the right moment with inside information to sell. On the 13th day, I compiled everything into a dossier that would make any investigative journalist weep with joy. Then I did something Raven would never have done. I called Vittoria directly. Miss Ashford, her voice was cool. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I have information you and Mr. Salvatore will want to see. Meet me at the Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. And if I refuse? Then I deliver this information to the FBI, the SEC, and every major financial journalist in the city. Your choice. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking slightly. What I was doing was risky, meeting her without Raven's knowledge, without backup. But I needed to see her face when I revealed what I'd found. The next afternoon, I sat at a corner table in the cafe, the dossier in a sealed envelope before me. Vittoria arrived exactly on time, impeccably dressed, her expression carefully neutral. Miss Ashford, you're either very brave or very foolish. She slid into the seat across from me. Raven doesn't know you're here, does he? What Raven knows or doesn't know isn't your concern anymore. I pushed the envelope across the table. Open it. She did. I watched her face as she processed the contents, the financial records, the communication logs showing her long-term connection to Salvatore, the evidence that her abandonment had been calculated betrayal rather than tragic choice. Where did you get this? Her voice was tight. I'm very good at finding things people want to keep hidden, as I mentioned once before. I leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You and Salvatore are going to disappear. No more blackmail attempts, no more contact with Raven, no more leveraging family connection for financial gain. In exchange, I don't share this information with authorities who would be very interested in your decades of corporate espionage. You can't prove... I absolutely can. I've already verified it with 3 independent sources. I smiled without warmth. I'm Raven Cavalcanti's executive assistant. Do you really think I'd come to this meeting without being absolutely certain? Vittoria stared at me, calculation warring with fury in her eyes. He chose well. You're as ruthless as he is. No, I'm protective of people I love. There's a difference. I stood. You have 24 hours to contact Salvatore and end whatever arrangement you had. After that, I make some very interesting phone calls. I left her sitting there, my heart pounding, but my steps steady. It was only when I was 3 blocks away that I allowed myself to text Raven. It's handled. I'll explain tonight. His response came immediately. Are you safe? Yes. Meet me at your place in an hour? I'll be there. When I arrived at his penthouse, Raven was pacing like a caged predator. He rounded on me the moment I walked in. What did you do? I told him everything. The investigation, the evidence, the meeting with his mother, the ultimatum. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, silence stretched between us. You took a significant risk, he said finally. I know. Vittoria she might have... He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Sarah, if something had happened to you because of my past, nothing happened. I moved to stand before him, taking his face in my hands. And even if something had, I chose this. I chose to protect you the way you've been protecting me since the beginning. His eyes searched mine. Since the beginning? You think I didn't notice? The way you positioned my desk to give me the best natural light? How you scheduled my reviews to always include raises? The fact that I'm the only assistant in company history you've kept for more than 6 months? I smiled softly. You were protecting me long before you admitted you cared, Raven. I just finally caught up. He kissed me then, fierce and desperate and grateful all at once. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. No more solo investigations. No more taking blackmail threats alone, I countered. Deal. He pulled back to look at me properly. Though I should mention, your investigative skills are terrifying. I learned from the best. I repeated my words from months ago. Now what do you say we actually destroy those files Salvatore was threatening you with, just to be thorough? Already done. I had them incinerated the day after he first showed them. At my surprised look, he smiled slightly. I was never going to let them win, Sarah. I was just buying time to figure out the right move. And what was the right move? Apparently letting you handle it. His arms came around me. Note to self, never underestimate my assistant. Your assistant and girlfriend, I corrected. My assistant, girlfriend, and, if you'll allow it, partner in every sense that matters. The words hung between us, weighted with implications about a future we'd both stopped fighting against. I'll allow it, I said softly. On one condition. Name it. Next time someone tries to blackmail you, we handle it together. No more protecting me from your world, Raven. I'm in it now, by choice. Let me stay. His smile was real and unguarded. You're impossible to argue with. I know. It's one of my best qualities. True to my threat, Vittoria and Salvatore vanished from our lives. No more attempted contacts, no more blackmail schemes, no more weaponizing the past. I delivered my evidence to a trusted financial journalist with instructions to publish only if they resurfaced. Insurance that kept them at a comfortable distance. The months that followed were the most stable I'd experienced since starting at Cavalcante Holdings. Our professional dynamic remained impeccable. In the office, I was still the efficient Miss Ashford, who anticipated every need, and he was still the demanding Mr. Cavalcante, who accepted nothing less than perfection. But after hours, we built something that felt remarkably like a real life. I moved into his penthouse gradually, a drawer here, a bookshelf there, until one day I realized I hadn't been back to my apartment in 3 weeks. My roommate found a new place. I officially forwarded my mail. And Raven, who'd never shared space with anyone, adjusted with surprising grace to having another person in his carefully ordered world. We learned each other's rhythms, how he needed silence in the mornings and conversation in the evenings, how I required coffee before human interaction and preferred cooking to ordering in, how we both worked best side by side at his kitchen counter, laptops open, occasionally stealing kisses between contracts. 8 months after the gala where everything changed, Cillian called with news. He and Margot were engaged. "I want you both there," he said, his joy infectious even over the phone. Margot knows the whole fake dating story. She thinks it's hilarious. She wants to meet the woman who saved me from my family's interrogations. The engagement party was small and intimate, held at Cillian's new antique shop location, the one I'd helped him find after Raven's acquisition spree. Margot was everything Cillian had described: brilliant, funny, and clearly smitten with him in a way that made something warm settle in my chest. Raven came with me, his hand at the small of my back, his presence commanding attention even in the casual setting. Cillian's grandmother spotted us immediately. "So this is the boyfriend," she said, her eyes twinkling with knowing amusement. "The one who caused all that delightful drama at the gala." "Elena." Raven's voice held genuine warmth as he greeted her. "It's good to see you again." "Oh, you two are on first-name terms now?" She laughed, delighted. "How wonderful. Though I must say, young man, your jealousy was rather obvious to those of us who were watching." Raven had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I wasn't, that is—" "He absolutely was," I interjected, saving him from further floundering. "Painfully, obviously jealous. It was quite entertaining, actually." "For you, maybe." But he was smiling as he said it, his arm sliding around my waist with easy possessiveness. "I maintain it was strategic concern for my assistant's well-being. Keep telling yourself that, boss." We mingled through the party, Raven surprisingly comfortable in the casual setting. I watched him charm Cillian's relatives, discuss antique furniture with Margot, and, most surprisingly, laugh genuinely at one of Cillian's stories about disastrous family dinners. "Thank you," Cillian said quietly, finding me alone by the drinks table. "For everything. The fake dating thing led me to Margot, and—" He glanced at Raven across the room. "Apparently it led you somewhere good, too." "It did." I followed his gaze, watching Raven listen intently to one of Cillian's aunts, his expression engaged rather than merely polite. Though I'm still not entirely sure how we got here. Jealousy, apparently, and your devastating capacity for sarcasm. Cillian grinned. Turns out those are excellent foundations for a relationship. Who knew? The evening wound down peacefully. Raven and I returned to his penthouse. Our penthouse now, I supposed, in comfortable silence. But as we entered the elevator, he pulled me close, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something I need to tell you." My stomach clenched. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just important. The elevator doors opened to his hour floor. He led me inside, then guided me to the windows overlooking the city. "I've been working on something. Restructuring certain aspects of my business operations." Restructuring how? Severing ties with the more questionable elements, the investments that skirt legality, the partnerships with people whose methods I can't entirely endorse. Building something that's completely legitimate, completely clean. He turned to face me fully. "Because I want a future that isn't constantly looking over its shoulder, and because you deserve better than a partner whose business dealings keep you awake at night." I stared at him, processing. "Raven, You don't have to change your entire operation because of me. I'm not doing it just because of you. I'm doing it because of us. Because what we have, what we're building, it matters more than maintaining an empire built on moral compromises. His hands came up to cradle my face. You made me want something different, Sarah. Something better. The raw honesty in his voice made my throat tight. That must have been complicated. It was necessary, and ongoing. It'll take another year to complete the transition fully. But I wanted you to know. I wanted you to understand that I'm choosing this. Choosing us. Choosing a version of myself that's worthy of what you've given me. I rose on my toes to kiss him, pouring everything I felt into the contact. When we broke apart, I was smiling through threatening tears. You were always worthy, you impossible man. You just needed to believe it yourself. I'm starting to. His thumb traced my cheekbone gently. Largely because you keep insisting on it despite significant evidence to the contrary. That's not evidence. That's your mother's narrative. And we both know she's an unreliable narrator. His laugh was soft. True. We stood there in the windows, the city spreading below us like possibilities made tangible. And then Raven moved away, returning a moment later with a small velvet box. My heart stopped. Before you panic, he said, not opening it yet. This isn't a proposal. Not exactly. Not exactly? It's a question. One I don't need answered tonight, or even this month. But one I wanted to ask while I still had the courage. He finally opened the box, revealing a ring. Elegant, simple, exactly what I would have chosen for myself if I'd been choosing. When you're ready, if you're ready, would you consider spending your life with someone as occasionally impossible as me? The tears I'd been holding back spilled over. That's the worst non-proposal proposal I've ever heard. I'm aware. Emotional honesty isn't my strength, as you've frequently pointed out. But he was smiling, vulnerable and hopeful in a way that made my chest ache. So, is that a think about it or a never in a million years? Or it's a you're really going to make me say yes without even hearing a proper question, you lazy, infuriating man. I took the box from him, studying the ring, platinum band, single diamond, understated elegance. But since I apparently can't resist you, even at your worst, yes, eventually, when we're both ready. His smile, rare, genuine, unguarded, was worth every complicated moment that had led us here. He slid the ring onto my finger, then pulled me close. I love you, he said simply. The first time he'd spoken the words aloud. I know. At his raised eyebrow, I laughed. I've known for months. You just needed time to catch up. How did you know? Because you bought an entire building to sabotage my fake boyfriend's business. That's not normal jealousy, Raven. That's love disguised as territorial possessiveness. In my defense, I didn't realize the distinction at the time. No, you were too busy tracking my phone and appearing at restaurants. I traced the line of his jaw affectionately. But I forgive you. Mostly because your completely irrational jealousy is what finally made me notice you. So you're saying I owe our entire relationship to poor emotional management and stalker-adjacent behavior? Essentially, yes. I kissed him softly, though I prefer to think of it as passionate interest expressed through deeply inappropriate means, much better phrasing. I have excellent organizational skills, remember? Including reorganizing inconvenient truths into palatable narratives. His arms tightened around me. What did I do to deserve you? You lost your mind over a fake relationship and made me work late for 3 months straight out of jealousy. Apparently that's my love language. Noted for future reference. We stood there in the windows, wrapped in each other, the ring on my finger catching the light. It wasn't traditional. Nothing about us was. But it was honest. Real. Built on a foundation of professional respect that had transformed into something infinitely more complex and valuable. 1 year later, we married on the rooftop of Cavalcante Holdings, the building where we'd spent 2 years orbiting each other without truly seeing, where jealousy had finally opened our eyes, where we'd built something that started with spreadsheets and ended with forever. Cillian was there with Margot, now heavily pregnant with their first child. Elena attended with genuine joy, having long since forgiven Raven for his aggressive acquisition of her grandson's original shop location. Even Marcus, Raven's perpetually serious head of security, cracked a smile during the ceremony. I wore a simple dress, elegant but practical, because I'd never been the type for elaborate displays. Raven wore his standard charcoal suit, but with one modification, a pocket square in burgundy, matching the dress I'd worn to the gala where everything changed. "You remember," I murmured as we stood before the officiant. "I remember everything." His hand tightened on mine. "That dress, your sarcasm when I asked about your dating life, the way you looked at me like I was being completely insane. You were being completely insane. I was jealous," he corrected with a small smile. "There's a difference. A small one." The officiant cleared his throat gently, reminding us we had an audience. We exchanged our vows. I'd written mine, he'd memorized his, and promised to continue choosing each other through complications and conflicts and occasional bouts of irrational possessiveness. When he kissed me, it was witnessed by the city that had always been his kingdom, now becoming ours. At the reception, Cillian raised a toast. To Sarah and Raven, who proved that the best relationships start with completely insane jealousy and evolve into something resembling actual sanity. May your future contain more sanity than your beginning. "Unlikely," I called back, to general laughter. "But at least it'll never be boring," Raven added, his arm around my waist. Later, as we danced under stars and string lights, he murmured against my ear, "Do you regret it? The complicated way we started?" "Not for a second." I leaned back to look at him. "If you hadn't lost your mind over Cillian, I might never have noticed I was in love with you. Sometimes the messy beginning is what makes the destination matter." Spoken like someone who's spent too much time organizing my philosophical ramblings into coherent thoughts. Someone has to. Left to your own devices, you'd just glare people into understanding. His laugh rumbled through his chest into mine. True. We swayed together, surrounded by people we cared about, building the next chapter of a story that had started with jealousy and bloomed into something neither of us had been looking for, but both of us needed. Somewhere in the crowd, I caught sight of my former self, the woman who'd arrived at work exhausted, who'd spent 2 years being professionally invisible, who'd agreed to fake date a friend and accidentally awakened something in her boss that neither of them could ignore. She wouldn't have believed this ending, would have thought it impossible that the cold, demanding Mr. Cavalcante could transform into the man who now held me like I was his entire world. But impossible things happened when jealousy cracked open carefully maintained facades, when perfect control shattered to reveal raw feeling beneath, when two people who'd been orbiting each other finally, crashed together and discovered that the impact was exactly what they needed. "I love you," I said again, because the words never stopped feeling miraculous. "I know," Raven replied, stealing my line with a smile. "You've told me approximately 8,000 times since I finally said it first. And I'll tell you 8,000 more. Get used to it. I'm counting on it." He kissed me softly, then added against my lips, "For the record, I love you too. In case that wasn't abundantly clear when I bought an entire building to sabotage your fake boyfriend. It was a subtle clue, yes. Subtle. Right." He spun me gently under the lights. "My wife, the master of devastating understatement." "Your wife," I repeated, tasting the words. "I like how that sounds." "Good, because you're stuck with me now. Was there ever any doubt? You track my phone, remember?" only for security purposes. Keep telling yourself that, boss. I'm not your boss anymore. I'm your husband. You're both, and occasionally impossible, and perfect exactly as you are. He kissed me again, deeper this time, uncaring of the audience. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For seeing me, for staying, for making me want to be better than the man I thought I had to be. Thank you, I countered, for losing your mind over a fake relationship and making me notice what had been right in front of me all along. So we're both thanking jealousy, essentially, and my devastating capacity for sarcasm, and your complete inability to express emotions like a normal human being. I grinned. We're a disaster, Raven. The best kind. He pulled me closer. The kind that works. And it did. Against all odds, despite the complicated beginning. Through jealousy and blackmail and estranged mothers, it worked. Because sometimes the messy stories are the best ones. Sometimes the wrong start leads to the right ending. Sometimes you have to lose control completely before you can find exactly what you've been looking for. And sometimes, just sometimes, the answer to the question you didn't know you were asking comes in the form of an impossible man who tracks your phone and buys buildings and finally learns to say "I love you" out loud, even if it takes him 8 months and a fake boyfriend to get there.